Thanks a lot, Susan, and good afternoon, everybody, again, and a warm welcome also to our panelists, Svetlina Penkova and Annika Hedberg, for today's discussion on clean energy investment and innovation. We've heard the two are important, and I'm really delighted to be in such a good company. I think we kicked off very strongly with Varun and Chris, who really gave us a very upbeat, but also very interesting insight. And it's a space that is moving very rapidly. And so Mrs. Penkova, or Svetlina, is a Bulgarian member of the European Parliament who sits in the S&D group and works in the ITRE Committee on Research and Energy Issues. Very relevant for this discussion, and welcome, Svetlina. And then Annika, who I know very well as well, is head of Sustainable Prosperity for Europe. And not to be confused, she's at the European Policy Center here in Brussels. Thank you both for being with us today. And really the way we're going to do this is maybe asking you first a couple of questions from my end, but then we'll hope to make this very interactive with the audience we have here with us today. But before we dive in, I would like to reiterate, really like Chris did, really the importance that all AmCham EU member companies, and so does my company, attaches to green transition and to decarbonizing our operations and supply chains. And the sustainable energy reform impacts manufacturers across all the economic sectors, as also Chris highlighted this, and not only those that are active in the energy sector. And I think it's important to highlight this. And we will only be possible if we all invest in it and contribute to this. And I mean, the staggering figures that Varun was sharing with us for the next 10 years, how that would line up, we all understand what that challenge is that we have ahead of us. But we at my company, Johnson & Johnson, we know that human health is fundamentally linked to the health of the planet. And we are committed to environmental health and responsible use of natural resources since, I mean, more than 30 years. And we have a long-standing commitment there. And one of our targets is to source 100% of our electricity needs from renewable sources by 2025. And I'm excited to share with you an important milestone that we reached today, especially, that will accelerate us towards that goal. And Johnson & Johnson has just announced 3 new wind and solar power purchase agreements that will secure 100% renewable electricity for all the Johnson & Johnson owned sites in Europe by 2023. And I can tell you there are many. These contracts are basically for new built wind and solar resources, which without our company's investment would not have been financed or developed. This will add an approximate 270,000 megawatt hours of clean power each year to our electricity portfolio. So we are very proud of this achievement. We have many more efforts from the AmCham EU members to share today, and we have already heard Chris sharing very impressive ones as well. And I encourage you really, like Susan was doing, to check out the Green Way campaign of AmCham EU Invested in Europe platform. We have, seen through that platform that, you see very many different examples from my company. For example, the first ever carbon neutral site in Helsingborg, Sweden, where we actually managed to reduce energy spent while increasing production by more than 25%. Furthermore, for example, in Belgium, we have implemented a geothermal energy installation that uses energy from hot water within the earth to power our world-class industrial site in the north of Belgium, this country. This has reduced our carbon footprint there by 30%. But it's not just about Johnson & Johnson's effort, for sure. I can talk for hours about, like Chris did, all the more than 35 initiatives, and it's still adding every day, that AmCham EU member companies are sharing in terms of how they are undertaking to make the green transition happen. So let's now turn to the panel. And let me start with you, Svetlina. So with the Fit for 55 package that everybody is anxiously waiting for, and that is set to be released tomorrow, as we understand. What do you think will be the most important elements of this package? And what are you hoping, you yourself, to see coming through there? You're still
Thank you. Yes, perfect. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Zeger. So first of all, I would like to thank both you and Chris for pinpointing on the fact that we need an open dialogue with the business from the regulatory side, I mean, because sharing the practices and us being able to put the right regulatory framework is crucial. And this is the short answer basically to your question, that the most important thing to have a proper and efficient green transition now is to have a regulatory framework that's consistent within all the member states. And the second very important bit here is the predictability of the regulatory framework, especially when we're speaking about green transition, about energy transition, and about the investors' long-term considerations in terms of commitment. I think the predictability in the regulatory framework is quite important. That's why most probably the important aspect of the Fit for 52 package is the final goal, which it has set, is reaching the EU 2030 goal of cutting the emissions by 55% and putting us on track to achieve the net zero emission by 2050. The aim of the package itself is to reduce the loopholes that exist in the current EU legislative framework with both revision of old documentation and introduction of new ones. The main problem here could come from the co-legislative process, which would be raised mainly because of the conflicts between the member states, the Commission, and the political parties in the Parliament. So that's the risk here, that we might come up with incomplete results. So it's quite important that we all understand the final goal and be able to put it correctly, rather than have a package which is based only on compromises and it's not workable for the business, and most importantly for the society and for the people. So we should be quite careful to not create a Frankenstein of legislative package, which would make the energy and the green transition even more difficult to facilitate. So I think this would be our main challenge. But the big important bit is the clear and targetable goals, and the fact that it would be working on updating old legislation that is already in place and introducing new one when there is a need for one.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. I mean, music to our ears. I would say the open dialogue, predictability, clear, really targetable metrics, and then making sure that we don't end up in the usual European compromise, which is not necessarily leading to the best outcome. So thanks for that. So Annika, the existing climate and energy framework targets, I mean, if we talk about it, the framework targets for, a share of 32% renewable energy resources and another 32.5% improvement in energy efficiency. How do you expect these targets, if you have some insider information, could be adjusted in tomorrow's Fit for 55 package? And what kind of incentives do you think should be available for the industry?
Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm happy to be here. I can't just but agree with the importance of whatever comes out tomorrow, and overall with the messages that we want to send out about the EU's climate and energy framework for 2030, but also as we go towards 2050. It's very important that there are very clear signals and coherent approach coming from policymakers on the direction of travel. And maybe I could just say that we still have a number of contradictions we need to address if we wish to have these clear signals and coherent approach. For example, the EU still continues to subsidize fossil fuels, and across EU member states, we see fossil fuels-based heating being subsidized as an example. So if we really are serious about incentivizing renewable energy, electrifying, greening energy consumption in buildings, supporting electrification of mobility, the messages, those targets, the financial incentives are very important. And here I would just like to say that let's start by removing support for fossil fuels as starters. Maybe I could just say that industry in Europe has traditionally been very good in making its own Europe-based operations energy efficient because of the relatively high price of energy in Europe. And although more can always be done, the areas where we need to increase efforts are in making building stock, but also mobility more energy efficient. And here it is initiatives like Renovation Wave and the attached funding and targets for electromobility that are important in accelerating deployment of energy efficient solutions on a grand scale.
Okay, thanks a lot. And we heard from Chris there already. Some part of it's working very hard on this. So that's a good linkage. And Svetlina, you have recently been appointed shadow rapporteur for your party group on the review of the EU industrial strategy within the ITRE committee. Now, how important a role will innovation play within this strategy? We heard from Varun that innovation is going to be really critical, even innovation either to scale up or even to develop. And so if you think particularly of already the impact the European industry will have to absorb after the COVID-19 pandemic crisis, so how do you see this all coming together?
So first of all, I would like to point out as well to what you've said in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic and its influence on both the society and the industry in any aspect. So we saw that the innovation and the technological advancements did help us quite a lot to be able to continue functioning, do our work, and to have the transition rather smoother than it would have happened without the technological advancement. Of course, we understand that this is not possible for every sector of the economy to implement technologies like home office environment or like working online. This is not applicable for every sector. We understand that. So our goal would be to try to optimize as much as possible the processes that could lead to more efficient and flexible work environment within that strategy. We hope that the people would be able to find the balance in that new normal we're going to be trying to set up there. In terms of one of the main focuses which we would defend when we develop that strategy would be supporting technologies that would enable the EU's strategic autonomy by investing in local SMEs, because they were one of the most affected by the pandemic due to the fact that they couldn't have the reliability on big enough capital reserves that would help them sustain without the normal functioning in an environment of a complete lockdown. So in that matter, we would need strong public support in the industrial sector, so we can safeguard the livelihood of the society and the people who are employed in those SMEs as well. So I think the focus in Europe now would be in terms of the many financial support opportunities that we're providing would be really towards the smaller businesses and smaller enterprises that suffered the most from the pandemic.
Yeah. And if you see now the Commission is in the process of reviewing and approving the member states' spending plans as part of the economic recovery drive. So how can the EU economic recovery plan ensure cleaner but also more accessible and affordable energy for all the member states?
That's quite a difficult question, but so definitely in terms of the both the industries and low income households, that's one of the key elements when we speak about the, as you said, about the financial support and about the regulatory framework. So it's important to mention here that when we speak about energy efficiency, we shouldn't just be thinking about changing the type of light bulbs that we use or changing the facades of the buildings. It is a rather more deeper concern. And in general, I believe that we should rethink the way our energy supply is organized at the moment. In terms of, we should move from the centralized toward decentralized system, which means that basically the consumers could produce part of the energy they're using. That's one way in which we could consider investments in projects which would allow that for the consumers in a method that's gonna have in a method that's gonna reduce the energy poverty. That definitely is gonna happen now in certain parts of Europe where they're dependent more on the fossil fuels, or where we see the increase in the prices of electricity due to the taxes on the emissions that are also increasing at this point.
Yeah, no, but that's probably also then seeing foregoing some of the natural income streams of government, so they will need to reflect about that as a result. But Annika, from your writing, you see enormous potential for alignment between the EU's green and digital transition policies, two of the main pillars, right? So in your view, how can digitalization further enhance climate action, particularly in the context of the energy sector then?
Thank you. What we've seen is that we've actually, in Europe, we've been promoting the green and digital transitions for a very long time. And for way too long, this actually have been seen as two separate transitions. And when it comes to policies and public spending, we haven't actually been very good in ensuring that data and digital solutions are used to address our sustainability challenges, to bring about real change in our economy and society. So there is enormous potential. If we did use the power of digitalization to solve these challenges, if we refocused at the twin green and digital transition, to really aligning these agendas and creating a framework that encourages businesses, but also cities and people to turn digitalization into a real enabler for sustainability, there's great benefits to be taken from this. And indeed, we've at EPC, in the last years, we've been looking at the potential with using digitalization as a means to address our sustainability challenges. And we see that the possibilities are enormous. Better management of data and deployment of digital solutions can provide the means to enable and even accelerate the transition to a more sustainable economy. And they can help contribute to system change in our, not just energy systems, but in our food and mobility systems as well. And so if we look at just the energy system transition, we can see that digitalization offers many possibilities for enabling smart grids, in enabling demand response, and as such empowering consumers to play a more active role, especially with improving energy efficiency. And we see that there's, for example, great role that blockchain could play in offering prospects to help producers and consumers contribute to the clean energy transition, including development and uptake of renewables. So just to say, we see that there's enormous potential, and that we could try to build on, and we should try to build on.
Do you think, Annika, that in this, I mean, we just heard from Varun, the kind of the green tech platform that is being set up between the US and the EU. In those areas, do you see particular importance of collaboration between the two blocks?
Absolutely. I think that ultimately we operate in a global world. We need global collaboration, and especially when it comes to digitalization, there are great prospects. For example, obviously EU is very keen on looking at, for example, ethical AI and role that AI can play. And I would argue that, for example, expanding this into a discussion about sustainable AI, how can we use algorithms in a way that actually they enhance sustainability? How can we use overall digital solutions in a way that they actually help to address our most fundamental sustainability challenges? This really would benefit from global collaboration. You could say that in some aspects, the EU at times is being criticized as lacking behind in the digital transition, but there actually are areas where the EU is quite advanced. We see great efforts being done around blockchain, and that's an area where the EU can certainly collaborate and can provide ideas on how we can use blockchain to, for example, increase transparency in global value chains. The same comes with industrial IoT, industrial AI, where we see that actually European businesses are quite advanced, often using these kind of solutions to actually make the industry, the business models themselves more sustainable. So there's certainly great potential for collaboration across Atlantic here as well.
Yeah, you know, and as with AmCham EU, we brought to life when just before the EU-US summit, Secretary of Commerce from the US, as well as Commissioner Breton, got together, and we brought together a whole mix of US corporation partnering with even small and medium-sized enterprises in Europe on this digital partnership, but also larger European companies that are also active on the US side in partnerships in, I mean, be it a digital partnership or supply chain resilience and so forth. So we brought that to life to show that really we all kind of tap into each other and it's interconnected. But maybe I just want to encourage the audience to post your questions. I'm going to very quickly turn to you. And maybe a last final question from my side to both panelists is, what in your opinion is the recipe for a successful energy transition in Europe? Are you confident, optimistic that the EU will be able to achieve its ultimate target of net neutrality by 2050? And let's start maybe with Svetlina.
So I think we've set quite an ambitious target, but at the same time, the EU with its regulation is giving enough of a time frame to help the society and the industry itself to prepare. And also, let's not forget the topic about the Green Deal and the green transition is not for the last year or two. It's been a discussion and something that's been happening in many parts of Europe for many years. If we look back in terms of the investment in renewable energy, alternative sources of energy, and all the measures and technological advancement that's been happening on that matter. In terms of how the energy transition could be successful, I think it would be successful only if we manage to fulfill two requirements. The first one is to manage to find the most cost-efficient mix of energy carriers for each industry. And here I'm speaking about integration of renewable, nuclear, gas, hydrogen, biofuels in the most efficient way, so that we can reduce to the maximum the greenhouse emission. This is the first condition. And the second condition is that we should manage to reduce the social inequalities instead of increasing them, of course. And for that matter, in terms of what the EU is doing, we have a lot of support measures. I'm just going to give one example, which is the Just Transition Fund. This is the financial support provided to the member states to help them switch their energy mix from the dependency on fossil fuels to alternative sources of energy. And it's important here that the biggest portion and amount of this fund is dedicated to help the workers employed in those types of industries. So it's more on the social aspect, because as Ege, you rightfully pointed out that the national authorities should be also quite active in implementing this transition. So the EU is trying to support in terms of like the economic impact, the social transition, the technological advancement. However, each of the countries should be able also to budget that transition in terms of the long-term perspectives that it has. So I'm pretty sure if we're all responsible, we could reach those ambitious goals in the not that short, I would say, time framework that we have set in front of us.
Very good. So optimistic. Good to hear, Svetlina. So Annika, are you different?
Oh, I'm realistic, I guess. This won't be easy. I would say that when it comes to climate and environmental goals, we see that the EU's track record tends to be in missing the goals it has set for itself. This is well portrayed in the latest European Environment Agency State of the Environment report. So this combined with the complexity of the challenge makes me realistic. This really won't be easy. But we do see that there is very strong momentum at the moment across the EU. We see this on the highest level and it's trickled down. And it's very important that the EU remains very clear about the direction of travel, but also about the benefits for business and people that this transition can bring about. And it's essential. It's you could say that it's easier to set targets. The tricky part when we start talking about the measures that will need to be taken and then actually implementing them. So now we are in the process. We have set for ourselves the grand goals, and now we need to make sure that the measures that are taken will be aligned with these goals. And we need to make sure that the implementation will be there. And here I'm looking especially at EU member states. We will require national, local leadership, real commitment at the national level to see through the agreed measures. And the social dimension has been mentioned. So I'll like to also highlight the importance of getting people on board. We won't achieve the 2030 and the 2050 goals if people, be it citizens or workers, regions, do not participate in this effort. And so this is not just about making funds available for regions in transition, but really ensuring that the concerns and needs of people are being heard. We need to engage with them. We need to incentivize them to play a role. And ultimately, we need to make it easy for people to contribute in the transition. So in an ideal world, every product and a service on the European market would be sustainable so that people wouldn't need to think about their climate and environmental footprints. So this is really the big grand challenge. And I would also like to just say, because we are talking about innovation here today, so obviously we need to continue to invest in innovation and continue to improve current low carbon solutions and develop new. But I tend to belong to those that believe that we don't actually need to wait for new innovations or wildcards like fusion energy to accelerate the transition. We have solutions to make this change happen. And if we look at renewable energies, if we look at the already existing solutions for greening, electrifying our mobility, or improving energy consumption in buildings, these are examples that show that the solutions are already there. And often the challenge for us is actually deploying them, actually getting them, scaling them up. So this is essential, and the next test case for EU. How do we help to scale those existing solutions so that they can be solutions for addressing our challenges? And I'll finish off just by saying that obviously achieving EU's goals will be dependent on what happens in the global context. We do need to cooperate across borders. But I am very confident, and where I am optimistic is that the EU currently is very committed to deliver. And while it continues to reflect and debate on the measures to be taken, and I'm not just talking about energy transition here, I do see that the direction is very clear and the will of the EU policymakers is there to make this happen.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. And I mean, yeah, one thing you pointed out is engaging the regions, the countries, the citizens, and so forth. That's where we're going to be depending on. There's 27 very different approaches probably, and that's where, I mean, some of the vulnerability could be coming from again. So, but I see we have questions lined up. We have Susan and we have Chris. So let's take that in that order. So Susan, if you want to ask your question, and then I'll turn to Chris.
Yes, good afternoon, ladies. Thank you so much. It was a fascinating panel, really good listening to your inputs. I think part of my question may have been answered a little bit because you've been focusing on the sort of social impact. But if you want to add anything to that about, just basically making sure no one's left behind. And I know, Selina, that was your focus there. So maybe in addition to that, Annika, you just mentioned then you're a realist of whether it's going to be successful or not, but said, well, the benefits need to be made clear. Now, I would challenge you on that. So I'm not sure, do you think the benefits are clear? They might be clear in this sort of Brussels bubble. Are they really clear outside, perhaps to those who stand to lose out? I'm not convinced. There are skeptics out there. What's in it for those who have less? Why should they enter into this? Why should they make an effort? So are those benefits clear to everyone? Would be my question. And if not, what do we need to do about it?
Shall I respond? And maybe I'll just very shortly just say that unfortunately, I don't think the benefits are clear. I think that we continue to fail to actually communicate the benefits, the societal benefits, the climate, the environmental, the economic benefits. And it's also, I think people are also confused by the fact that, as I mentioned before, we're not always coherent in our approaches. So our policies are also sending out at times contradictory messages, where it makes it even more difficult for people themselves to know what is exactly the direction, as well as obviously for businesses on kind of where are we heading. But I would say this, I always like to kind of bring in for businesses, I would like to remind that obviously we know the direction where we're going, and it is also about the global commitment that we've set for ourselves. We have the Paris Climate Agreement, we have the Sustainable Development Goals that provide us the context, they provide us the direction where we need to go. They provide us also the rationale, the reasoning why we need to act, and the urgency for action. I think that it's very clear that there is no time to waste if we actually want to make sure that there will be prosperity and well-being, not only for the future generations, but already for the existing generations. So if you dig a bit deeper, I think that's the rationale for action and the urgency for action is there. But we need to go beyond this, obviously, to communicate the immediate benefits for people, because the reality is that whatever measures we're going to be taking, there will be transitional costs. And we already see this. And when the Fit for 55 package will be put forward tomorrow, I can just imagine the headlines across EU member states on what this is going to cost, how your energy bills are going to increase, what kind of extra cost this will bring in for mobility. So the policymakers need to be prepared. And that's why also I was referring to the responsibility of local leaders to communicate what are the benefits in terms of improving air quality, improving actually the economic situation on a local, on a national level, by the fact that we actually are going to be addressing some of the greatest health impacts of our current mobility system. So it is about changing the narrative and not being on defensive, but actually saying that there are enormous benefits that these changes, these legislations, these measures are going to bring, and these are not just for the future generations, but that people can feel the immediate benefits come tomorrow. So it is really, I think that it's also about changing and turning the narrative into positives rather than being on defensive.
Yeah, you want to say something, Svetlina? Maybe.
I think, yes. Yeah, I think Annika was quite detailed in her response. I just want to add something in terms of the fact if people see the benefits for them in that green transition. I believe that even with the lockdown, I mean, what we've seen that was caused by the pandemic, the air quality was drastically improved just in a matter of a couple of weeks in some of the big cities across Europe. And I think people actually realized how much of an impact our way of life and the constant pollution from the transportation we're using, or for some of the ways the industry is shaped, they just seen the actual impact on that. That was one addition that I think the realization bit might be could happen a bit faster just because of that precedent we had. And also interestingly for me, because I spoke a bit about the SMEs and about startups, I would just give one example from my country, from Bulgaria, which did impress me quite a lot. Speaking with the association which are involving the startups in Bulgaria, for instance, and we're speaking about more than 600 startups that they have united at the moment, which might not seem like a massive number, but it's still significant. With those are projects led by young people. And they did tell me that at the moment, between 20 and 30% of those startups are focusing on green projects, on energy efficiency in terms of technological development, or some methods that could help us reach that. Which means that if the younger generation is already convinced, and when they're looking for entrepreneurial opportunities, they're focusing on that aspect, it means that a big part of the society is already in the right track in realizing the importance of that for our future.
Very good point. And we heard from SMEs recently, and they said really, I mean, aligning standards and regulatory systems between the US and Europe is really critical to find an approachable market. But also, I mean, Europe is short on capital to help these companies pick up and do the necessary investments. And so that's also then an area that we need to support these startups with. So, but turning to Chris for your question, and if you want to direct it to one of the panelists specifically, please indicate. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Edgar. And thank you very much, Annika and Svetlina. I mean, I've really enjoyed your comments. And I actually want to piggyback a little bit different than what I put in the dialogue box based on what you both just said. It's very clear that the social benefits are at the heart of everything that we're doing here. You know, at the end of the day, this is about preserving, you know, the quality of life, not for ourselves, but for our children, our grandchildren, and generations to come. And I don't think anybody who's on this call wouldn't agree with that in some principle. So my comments are less about whether it's worth the pain, because it obviously is, but the practicalities of getting from where we are today to where we're going to. And obviously, you know, the examples that you heard today, whether it was Zegers, whether it was the ones that I shared with some of our other member companies, or whether it was my own companies, there's a significant on cost that the European consumer has said they're willing to pay, and that the European society says they're willing to pay. And we're all encouraged that there appears to be a better dialogue across the Atlantic. So there may be a transatlantic way to lead here. However, neither the United States nor Europe compete in a vacuum. And we're part of a global trading system, and we're part of a global business environment. And the practicalities of those of us that are on kind of the bottom of the food chain in business on the ground is we've got to compete every day and make it to that beautiful end state, you know, decades from now in 2050 when we reach carbon neutrality. In the meantime, as those of us that are believing or encouraging our companies to invest to help reduce the carbon emissions of our businesses, there's an on cost to that. There's a reason why people are accessing fossil fuels. It is the cheaper, most efficient way from a pure dollars and cents or a euro and cents basis to get there. So as businesses believe and join this, it's an observation as much as a question, but I would be interested in both panelists' perspective on it. How do you ensure the businesses that are investing, whether they're SMEs or whether they're large multinationals, have a level playing field relative to who they are competing with inside the single market? It's a very difficult request, but I think it's easy to write the legislation sometimes. It's very hard to do it in a way that doesn't disadvantage someone operating. And I'll give you a practical example in my own industry. Over the past 15 years, the single fastest growing segment of the tire industry has actually been imports from Asia. Okay. And there's a plain and simple reason for that. It's a very labor intensive manufacturing process. Every tire is literally made by a tire builder. And quite frankly, accessing significantly, lower cost labor and quite frankly, lower cost capital has undermined the industry significantly. And whether you talk to Michelin, you talk to Bridgestone, you talk to, Continental in Germany, will all be able to tell you that same trend. That will be accelerated here. Now, my industry, I don't really necessarily want you to respond to my industry, but are there any thoughts or ideas about how we support the businesses that are supporting the Green Deal and the circular economy, and at the same time understand how do we protect our businesses to get to the other side?
So maybe very short interaction from the two panelists. Any?
Of course, you wouldn't expect a precise or a clear-cut answer to that. I imagine you understand it's a difficult question. I would just bring us a bit back in time when we were discussing the climate law. The EU was the first political formation that introduced the climate law, and then we had the same discussion. If this is not going to destroy the EU's competitiveness in terms of industry, business, when we impose that. Interestingly enough, following the climate law that was introduced in the EU, then we had the US quite closely following us in terms of introducing the same type of regulations. And now we've seen that India is also setting up the targets for that, which means that in terms of the regulatory framework, Europe is amongst the leaders for setting that, and we should, of course, keep up that in order to protect the business and the companies on that matter. But I believe that if we speak about a regulation that everyone should follow, how we do support the businesses that do have that in their principal way of acting, the easy answer to that would be by giving them access to additional financial support with the different projects and the different packages Europe is offering. Because what we observe in Europe now with any financial support, that it's out there. One of the biggest requirements is for those projects or companies to be green or to be with the focus on technologies, as Zeger said, the two main pillars. So that's the easy answer to that. The second bit is it might be a bit more abstract, but we're hoping that if we have the right policies in place and if we have the support of the society in terms of the way consumers would change their behavior, would be more towards supporting companies which are compliant, to say the regulatory word for that, with that new trend. And you can easily see that, especially in the younger consumers. But is there going to be a disadvantage for certain sectors that couldn't adapt, or it's just impossible for them to adapt because of the cost efficiency and the kind of reliability on certain fuels, especially the fossil fuels, which they cannot easily switch? Yes, there's going to be a disadvantage to that. But it's important to clarify here that when we're speaking about net zero emissions, we're not completely speaking about cutting off all the emissions. Net zero means that we need to kind of counter effect that. So we're not speaking about the complete wrap up of all the fossil fuels. We understand that some industries are quite dependent on them, so we cannot completely cut them off that grid. But it's kind of trying to find a more balanced mix in terms of that.
Thank you for your answer.
Thank you. Was there anything, Annika, you wanted to quickly comment on?
Maybe I could just quickly say that I think that it is the change that we're currently seeing. It is happening so quick. The world has really changed in the last few years, and with these international climate commitments that are coming on the table, what we really are seeing is a race to the top at the moment. The international climate commitments provide the context, and we see that the market is growing for sustainable solutions. So this is no longer just the EU trying to push its agenda, but we really see that there is a global buy-in and global demand growing for sustainable solutions. And what I would suggest, as I mentioned before, the Paris Climate Agreement, the SDGs, providing us the direction, and I would say that they provide the direction for every industry across the world. This is the direction where we're going, and the benefits are up for taking for those who are keen to increase their ambition, lead the way, and that can provide sustainable products and the services that the world needs today and tomorrow. But I fully recognize that there is a transitional period and there are going to be transitional costs, and it is about just finding the right time when to invest and where to invest. And this is obviously a challenge that the EU is trying to battle with as well. The EU has shown the power of policies and how policies and investments can thrive and support change, but obviously the EU itself is at the same time battling with this, that how can it at the same time help to support industry in Europe, ensure competitiveness in Europe. We don't want industry to escape the European market because of the increased demands on our market. So it is a very fair balance that we're seeing. And I think that as we are waiting for the Fit for 55 package coming out tomorrow to really make the Green Deal goals a reality, it is very important that what we mentioned before is that the direction of travel is clear and there is coherent approach. There are clear demand signals for innovators, for businesses, and it's essential that the EU continues to work together with other countries, other key emitters beyond its borders, with the aim that we want to create a global enabling framework for the transition, global market for the products and solutions we desperately need. And there are ways to do that: trade, international carbon trading, international standards. There are so many ways for EU to collaborate with others that we really need to continue to build on.
Okay. I'm afraid that's all we have time for today. I'm sure I see still the audience wanting to come in, and I really would want to continue this very rich and engaging discussion. It's definitely a complex area, but I'll stick with what Svelina in the beginning pointed out. Is really critical is the predictability, the open dialogue. I think we need to be agile, learning fast, changing eventually if it isn't working, looking at, as Annika said, the financial but also the market incentives that are going to be needed, and not working in isolation, but really, I mean, leveraging. I mean, there is solutions today, and there is going to be needing further R&D and upscaling needed. And all of this needs to come together in an ecosystem where everybody needs to engage, nobody left behind. But really, AmCham EU wants to play a key role in there with all of you engaging this and being critical, but at the same time, highly supportive, as you will already see. And again, a call to check out our campaign. But allow me just to extend my gratitude once more to our great panelists, to Svetlina Penkova, honorary member of the European Parliament, Annika Hedberg, head of the Sustainable Prosperity for Europe at the EPC, and really for joining us today, carving out time for us and offering your expert insight on a very lively topic. So over to you, Susan, to close the session today, and thanks to the audience for being there.
Yes, so thank you, Segor. There's not too much left to say. Just to say, I think it was a really rich discussion. I had lots of C words down here, actually. I think, Varun mentioned competition and collaboration. Annika, coherent approach and avoid those contradictions. We had consumer behavior from Svetlina, context being global. I was trying to think of a C for you, Chris, but Chris is a C himself. But I think the main word that came out from Chris Delaney was level playing field. Chris's level playing field, and Zega, indeed, you know, it's a challenge, but I think the word then confident came out from Annika at some point, to saying, who's a realist, lots of challenges, but we're confident we can get there. But and I think importantly, someone mentioned a lot of the solutions already there, Annika. You have to work on those. But with that, I would just like to thank you. Thank you, Zega, for the great moderation. Thank you, Chris, Svetlina, and Annika. Everyone who's still left on the call, be sure to check out the Invested in Europe platform. Watch for the next events. We're going to roll out several more events like this and the campaign during the year. So look forward to seeing you after the summer. Thank you very much, everybody. Bye for now.